We starting?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody, again, or for the first time at midnight. We are Veza Fernandez and Magdalena Hovanec. We are organizers of the symposium Music Push Over the Sands. And with us is again, he's been there already at 10 in the...
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Sorry, we
again,
need to, now we will hear us double.
Midnight. All right.
We forgot to mute the YouTube.
Now
we have done this 3 times and still things can happen.
So our guest, Alex Arteaga from Barcelona, he's been there with us at 10 in the morning, but now he's with us again because it was for us important to have this, also a wish of Alex and of ours, to have this panel, to have the lecture also in the different time zones, so for people from different time zones. I present Alex again. Alex Arteaga is a researcher working between Barcelona and Berlin. He's working in the context of the academia and also as a freelancer. His research integrates aesthetic and philosophical practices relating to aesthetics, the emergence of sense and meaning, and the relationships between orality, architecture, and the environment, which he investigates through phenomenological and activist approaches. His research projects include embodied architecture and the artistic research project Contingent Agencies, which is funded by the Program for Arts-Based Research of the Austria Science Fund. Alex heads the Auditory Architecture Research Unit and lectures in the MA Sound Studies and Sonic Arts at Berlin University of the Arts. We're gonna again proceed to Alex's lecture. The lecture of Alex is gonna again happen in the dark. And now the Zoom is yours.
Thank you both again for inviting me and for organizing this whole stuff online when it was supposed to be live. Just few words before I really begin with the lecture. As Magdalena said, my lecture is going to be in the dark, which responds to the history of this project. When this project was going to be taking place in Graz, we decided to have an acousmatic lecture, to invite me to lecture in a dark space. And we decided to keep this idea of acousmatic lecture also in this digital online format. Now I am not in a dark space, but I'm going to cover my camera when I begin to lecture, and I will be back as image to respond to your questions. Why to do so? Well, as I said, it responds to the history of the project, but also as a sign that constraints, in this case, the limitation or the exclusion of image, can lead to an extension and intensification of the process itself, in this case, a lecture. So I'm going to be with you as sound, as a voice, but I disappear as an image, and I will be back after the lecture. This lecture is a further development of some elements of an exposition on the research catalog entitled Aesthetic Practices of Very Slow Observation as Phenomenological Practices, a step to an ecology of cognitive practices. This exposition will be published as part of the special issue on ecologies of practice of the online journal Roku. The new step I'm making through this lecture aims at deepening into and further specifying the concept of aesthetic cognition. Trying to lay a foundation for researching through aesthetic practices as an autonomous variety of research, I am coining this concept, the concept of aesthetic cognition, as an alternative to artistic knowledge. Obviously, this alternative is twofold. On the one hand, I propose to replace artistic with aesthetic, and on the other hand, knowledge, and more generally, epistemology with cognition. A section of this lecture will be focused on the second move, but now I would like to briefly address the first, because I guess that at least some of you define yourself as artists, and because the broadly accepted term for the framework in which this lecture develops and to which it refers is artistic research. To make it clear, yes, I am talking about artistic research, but I do so referring to a variety of artistic research, a variety of research in the arts that I denominate research through aesthetic practices. By using this formulation, on the one hand, I aim at affirming the fundamental function of practices for this kind of research. One constitutive difference between aesthetic research and other forms of research is that it is realized through, that is, by means of, by virtue of aesthetic practices. But on the other hand, what are my reasons to substitute artistic with aesthetic? For the sake of shortness, I'm only going to mention three basic reasons. First, I opt for the concept of aesthetic in order to feel free to consider all kinds of practices, that is, not only those considered to be artistic, as being potentially aesthetic research practices. Second, I favor the concept of aesthetic in order to stress that the ultimate goal of this process is not to produce art or artworks. And third, I choose aesthetic to qualify the practices that enable this form of research in order to point to the most fundamental constitutive aspect of these practices, which is to specify and systematize what I call, as we will see, aesthetic action. The possibility to conceive and perform aesthetic practices as a specific and autonomous variety of research relies fundamentally on a clear definition of the specific intentional relationship between these practices and their object, that is, the object of research. I use the term intentional here, not so much in a phenomenological sense, meaning the modalities of mobilization of subjective agencies towards the inquired subject matter, but rather in its colloquial sense of intending or aiming at something. My question in this regard is this: what is the goal of aesthetic research practices? Or more precisely, what do we researchers intend to achieve in relation to the issues to be researched by researching through aesthetic practices? Although there are alternative takes, the answers to these questions tend to refer to the concept of knowledge and to be formulated as follows. Research practices, whatever kind, aim at knowing, describing, explaining, clarifying, and elucidating the object of research. Or research practices aim at increasing knowledge about their object of research. Or research practices aim at producing knowledge about the object of research. These formulations share a common structure which is based on two elements, knowledge and the object of research. These two elements are treated here implicitly as objects, that is, as clearly determined and counter entities. And this treatment allows for an unmistakable differentiation between them. The object of research and the knowledge about it are two different things. On this basis, The relationship established between these two entities contributes to both clarifying and reinforcing their differentiation by, firstly, establishing a clear and irreversible direction from knowledge towards the object of research, and secondly, by specifying this direction with a connector about knowledge, about the object of research. The relationship between knowledge and the object of research to which it refers is thus a relationship of aboutness. Accordingly, knowledge is understood in this framework, which is not the one I consider to be fruitful for researching through aesthetic practices, as an objectual entity telling us something new in the case of knowledge produced by research, by new research, about the inquired object. The last sentence makes explicit a third element which is implied in the formulations I presented. The knowledge about the object of research is knowledge for someone. In this regard, I just want to remark that this third element, despite its subjective nature, is also treated as an objectual entity, that is, an entity which is clearly defined and demarcated and thus categorically differentiated from the other two. The researcher, the object of research, and her knowledge about it are three different things. Furthermore, this system is structured by closed entities relating to one another by referencing knowledge about something and transmission knowledge for someone leads to results that obey the logic of addition. Knowledge is added to the inquired object. There is more knowledge about something. And to the researcher, she possesses and accumulates more knowledge. In contrast, aesthetic practices, also those which are not research practices, that is, all forms of systematized aesthetic action, I will clarify this term soon, relate to the objects they approach not in terms of aboutness, but of withness and throughness, and their results obey rather the logic of transformation. Aesthetic practices establish non-hierarchical relationships between the practitioners, the performed actions, the implied technologies, the intended objects and issues, and the results of the emerging relational dynamics. Aesthetic practices perform specific forms of touch, of contact, of being in touch with. To practice aesthetically implies to establish relationships, or better, to allow relationships to come to be, on one and very basic scope, the scope of meeting bodies, animated and non-animated bodies, living and non-living bodies. Bodies meeting in and by virtue of whatever medium, but despite the medium, and this is the decisive question, in an immediate and unmediated way. Bodies touching and letting themselves being touched, or better, bodies touching us letting themselves be in touch, entering mutual and non-hierarchical relationships of touch, of being, of remaining in touch, of sustaining the contact, of dwelling in intimate witnessing. The prolongation of this specific relational state increases the porosity of the bodies in contact. Bodies, therefore, become permeable, and this is how witness leads to throughness. Bodies, porous, fragile, vulnerable bodies become penetrable, transitable, not only in the sense of being passable, of not being an obstacle, of being a viable space, space of transit, but more fundamentally of becoming transformable bodies. Sustain mutual relationships of touch, or better, sustain states of touch in mutual touch, induced by aesthetic practices, lead to potential mutual transformation of the practitioners, the performed actions, the implied technologies, and the intended objects and issue as the results of the emerging relational dynamics. Accordingly, specific kind of aesthetic practices, aesthetic research practices, do not aim at producing objectual entities that establish relationships of aboutness with the inquirer's subject matter in order to describe, explain, clarify, or elucidate it for the researcher and her research community. Aesthetic research practices do not aim at producing knowledge. Instead, these practices enable transformations. In order to lay a better foundation to affirm that the result of aesthetic research practices are not productive but transformational, and to clarify the kind of transformation that these practices enable, I'm going to address now one of the most basic concepts of this lecture: aesthetic action. That is, the kind of actions that are carried out by practicing aesthetically. I am defining the concept of aesthetic action in the framework of the theories of embodied and situated cognition, and more specifically of the enactive approach to cognition. This decision implies to take distance from the conceptual framework in which these issues are traditionally tackled: epistemology. The etymological construction of this term shows in a nutshell the reasons that motivated this decision. Epistemology derives from Greek episteme, which finds its roots in epistastai, composed by the prefix epi, over, and histastai, to stand. Accordingly, it means literally overstand. Disregard the particular connotations that the term over might acquire. A constitutive element of the epistemological tradition is a concept of knowledge that stands over the object it refers to. As I said, these structures differ fundamentally from the way aesthetic relationships work, and therefore I do not think that this is a fruitful soil to understand transformations enabled through acting and practicing aesthetically. A comprehensive description of the enactive approach to cognition would clearly by far exceed the scope of this lecture. Therefore, I'm going to focus on two basic ideas: the idea of cognition as action and the idea of cognition as transformation. In this conceptual framework, cognition is understood as embodied and situated action, that is, as actions carried out by situated bodies, meaning bodies in contact with one another, in structural coupling, formulated in enactivist terms. This affirmation is not restricted to any particular form of action. According to the enactive approach, cognition is not limited to the performance of the so-called cognitive or rational skills. Every action of a living being, from monocellular bacteria to humans, is understood to be cognitive, that is, to realize cognition. Accordingly, cognition is the network of all actions carried out by situated bodies, or more specifically, the ever-growing meshwork of all interactions in which living beings participate. The reasons for this vast extension of the concept of cognition will be more understandable when, in few moments, I will address the idea of cognition as transformation. But for now, it is clear that every specification of the concept of embodied and situated cognition, or better, inactive cognition, have to be based on a specification of the concept of action. Accordingly, a concept of aesthetic cognition needs to be grounded on a concept of aesthetic action. Aesthetic action is a form of interaction, that is, a form of human action coupled to other forms of action which not necessarily have to be performed by humans or by living beings. A body, an embodied self, interacts aesthetically by adopting a specific operative disposition of its skills. This disposition is characterized, on the one hand, by the intensification of sensory motor and emotional actions, and on the other hand, by the neutralization of target-oriented and will-based forms of acting. By doing so, the body privileges its most fundamental relational skills, that is, those mobilizing the interconnections between sensors and movers, and those allowing bodies to feel, to sense what is happening in the whole system, body environment, and to be mobilized as a whole by this feeling, by this sense. The power of these spontaneous, radically situated bodily interactions that develops exclusively due to the coexistence of actual agencies in a specific here and now should not be diminished by the mobilization of skills that obey different spatiotemporal structures. Target-oriented and will-based actions devaluate this radical situatedness in favor of possible and desired futures of other places and situations to be. Acting aesthetically, the body takes a position of body between bodies, which allows for a spontaneous unfolding of the structural coupling of bodies as bodies and its surroundings, and leads to a de-hierarchization among all agents involved. Aesthetic action develops in the field of shared and distributed agencies that this form of action enables. Aesthetic action, thus, implies renouncing to control in favor of common, relational, and processual realizations. The aesthetically acting body does not aim at controlling the development of the situation in which it participates, but instead at becoming highly receptive. The aesthetic body, as I said before, is a porous, vulnerable body. To become more receptive is one transformation emerging out of the dynamics enabled by acting aesthetically, and this transformation of the aesthetic body allows it to become aware of further transformations emerging in and with its environment. The aesthetically interacting body becomes a highly sensitive listener to what it is in touch with. The same way that considering cognition as action, as any form of action, implies an extension of the so-called cognitive skills. The specific way that cognition is understood as transformation in the enactive framework involves a significant expansion. In this context, cognition is extended to the concept of life. Cognition here is understood as the emergence of selves and environments out of the interaction between bodies, or more precisely, biologically realized autonomous systems, and their surroundings. In other words, cognition is understood in this framework as a continuous process of transformation of bodies into selves, selves present for themselves and for other selves, and surroundings into environments present for the emerging selves. Formulated in another way, cognition in this context is the radically relational process of sense making, or more specifically, of emergence of sense enabled by the realization of autonomous forms of organization as living beings in a structural coupling with the components of their surroundings. Taking now a phenomenological perspective, cognition could be outlined as the emergence of phenomena and phenomenal worlds, that is, significant entities and all other presences that integrate those entities in a significant way, present for those subjects that co-constitute them and simultaneously co-emerge as phenomena for themselves. This concept of cognition implies a radical specification of embodiment, situatedness, and the fundamental intertwinement of both processes. Cognition comes to be through the interactions between bodies, or better, the processes of becoming the very interacting bodies, and their surroundings, or better, the process that transform the surroundings of these bodies in the environments for these bodies. More radically, cognition is interaction between bodies and their situation. Cognition is situated embodiment. Cognition, thus, is transformative interaction, an ever-growing meshwork of interactions enabling phenomenal reality, what things and environment are for those to whom they appear to come to be. On this basis, I am beginning to define aesthetic cognition as a specific variety of cognition realized through aesthetic action that enables particular kinds of transformation. In other words, aesthetic cognition is a particular form of intervention in the processes of sense-making that influences these processes in a specific way. Aesthetic practices, as understood as systematized setting of aesthetic actions, enable a particular kind of transformation of the system configured by the aesthetically acting body and its environment. This transformation manifests first as a destabilization, potentially a destabilization of both the whole system and its single constituents, the acting body, its environment as a whole, and its singular components. I use the term destabilization to express a loss of steadiness, of clearness, of unambiguousness, of the phenomenal presence of all these elements for the aesthetically acting body. Clearly established distinctions begin to melt. Formal contours of phenomenal objects, of single phenomena, begin to liquefy. Sedimented meanings turn to be vague, ambiguous, and thus open, available. This destabilization This breakdown of certainties induced by acting aesthetically leads to the disclosure of new fields of intelligibility of the phenomena in crisis. The horizon for the possible new stabilizations, for processes of new constitutions, turn to be in the foreground. The ground appears and reveals as a condition of possibility for new figures to emerge, or better, for the fixed, accepted, unquestioned figures to be transformed. Formulated in enactivist terms, the cognitive domain of the present phenomena, that is, the sphere of possible significances, expands. Unforeseen meanings and relations between phenomena turn to be possible. Static cognition, therefore, is fundamental cognition. It provides conditions of possibility for thinking things and relationships anew, radically anew. It allows for empirically and logically unforeseeable presences, forms, senses, meanings, and relationship between presences to be possible. To destabilize well-established phenomena and relationships between them, to disclose new fields of intelligibility, and to place this open and extended cognitive field at disposal to be taken as reference for other cognitive modes are functions of aesthetic cognition. These functions can be realized through aesthetic research practices and the methods that result out of their combinations in relation to the specificities of each subject matter to be inquired. Aesthetic cognition accomplishes a specific function in a complex cognitive system, and therefore it must be realized in connection with other forms of cognition enabled by other kinds of practices. I am giving this lecture confined in my apartment, in my neighborhood, in my city, in my country. And this situation, simultaneously personal, local, and global, makes it even clearer to even more people that the so-called ecological crisis is literally a crisis of the logic of the house, oikos, house, dwelling place. It is therefore not only a crisis of the relationship between humans and the rest of nature. It is a crisis of relationships. It is a crisis of the way we realize, meaning simultaneously thinking and making, relationships, all kinds of relationships. It is, thus, in the most radical and comprehensive sense, a systemic crisis. Confronting this evidence, the question that unavoidably strikes me is this: what to do as an artist researcher? My current and thus provisory answer is twofold. On the one hand, I am trying to realize, again in its double sense of thinking and making, how my research practices, and in general these kind of practices, aesthetic research practices, contribute to changing the situation for the better. This means for me to understand, formulate, communicate, and principally perform the specific intentional relationship between aesthetic research practices and the object of inquiry, which leads me to attempt to define an aesthetic cognition as an aesthetic specification of the embodied and situated cognition. On the other hand, and addressing the problem not as an issue to be tackled, but structurally, that is, attending to the set of relationships that structure my work. I am trying to realize, once more as thinking and making, ecologies of cognitive practices. Addressing the first part of my answer, I think, firstly, that the dimension and complexity of the crisis we are experiencing exclude the possibility of a way out merely based on the production of knowledge and its social implementation through the imposition of norms of behavior. This way has to be, at least, complemented with alternatives that approach the problem through strategies of transformation instead of substitution. The substitution of a non-functioning systemic relation or a set of relationships with another, supposedly better one. Static research as a non-productive but transformative variety of research can contribute to this endeavor, but only through an efficient connection between different kinds of practices of thinking, understanding thinking as the performance of cognitive transformation and epistemic processes of knowledge production, performed through different variety of research practices, will allow us to find ways of achieving our common goal, to found and maintain the viability of our lives, of our common lives, of our lives inevitably in common. What is needed now is to create frameworks in which diverse research practices can be experimentally conceived and performed in touch with one another in a fruitful space of coexistence. I am not talking about fostering multi, trans, or interdisciplinarity. The concept of discipline is absolutely unnecessary if we reinforce the concept and the performance of practice. I am affirming instead that we need ecologies of cognitive practices, systemic sets of dynamic and operational relationships between different kinds of research practices that, on the basis of their respective autonomies, enable the realization of the necessary multi-perspectival view on the crisis to be overcome. Thank you. You're still there.
Hello.
Yes, we are there. Thank you very much, Alex, for the lecture. We got people watching.
That's nice.
Yes, 14 people. And there's been a question that, all right, there's a question that is a complex question, but it's a good question. It's a bit maybe referring to this, what I asked you before we went online, actually, but a bit different. I'm gonna read it to you. When we talk about embodiment as a way of cognition, how can we defend our point of view in an interdisciplinary research? For example, a census-based research between cinema and architecture. And then it goes on the question, while we are aware of different ways that our body, sensation, and feeling are involved in the process of perception of a cinematic atmosphere versus an architectural one. Mm-hmm.
And the question is at the beginning, how can we defend, right?
How can we, yes, when we talk about embodiment as a way of cognition, how can we defend our point of view in an interdisciplinary research?
Okay.
And she speaks about architecture and
yeah. It's a very good question. And this is exactly my point. Well, in different ways. First of all, I think it's necessary. Hopefully it will stop to be necessary. But for now, I think it's necessary to make clear that our practices, what I call aesthetic research practices, are legitimated research practices. Yeah. So we have to show, we have to explain, but also to show to other practitioners, to other kind of practitioners, to other researchers. All researchers are practitioners, that our research practices make sense. And I use this expression in both senses. So it's senseful and contributes to sense making, to the general sense making. Yeah, and we have to do it in different ways. For example, as I did it, or I try to do it tonight, explaining it, saying it, argumenting, but also in our terms. We have to build up what I like to call research, aesthetic research dispositive. We have to show our artifacts, our processes, our practices. We have to share them. We have to create conditions for participation for other researchers which are not researching on an aesthetic base, in order for them to experience, to get in touch with our forms of practice. It is a little bit a kind of a circle, right? And the big question, and you formulated this question, Magda, this morning, is how to break this circle, how to get in when you are out, right? How to get accepted as a researcher, how to obtain or to acquire this legitimacy. Yeah, I think we have to do it really, the research we're doing. Let me say, doing good research, and doing it in our terms. Yeah, not trying to falsify our research and to put it in terms of other kinds of research, like sociological, philosophical, natural science research, but to make clear our terms, to bring our research into the world, and to make it accessible to other researchers. This is what I'm saying. I'm giving a very, very general kind of a framework answer, and the question is how to do it every time, how to do it by researching concrete atmospheres in cinema and architecture, you know, how to create dispositives that disclose these atmospheres, not only for us aesthetic researchers, but also for other kinds of researchers. And I said then, my option is not to go into multidisciplinary, but to focus on the idea of practices and saying that is what we are doing. That is how we are doing it. Please join and continue doing what you do, taking these practices in as a reference.
Because this made me now think about that actually what you are talking about, I feel that in a sense, in the aesthetic research or artistic research, it is really very much more a question of method, so of the howness, of the quality of howness, rather the evidence we are producing, because we are not producing evidence, because that's what I was wondering. How are we able to approve or to grant the same perception to any person we are sharing our research with, if there is no evidence, if there is no something that can say black and white, look, this is what we found out, and that's it. So the sensation and the experience everybody of us will have will also probably be diverse, but it should have a certain quality that apparently does move us somewhere together in one direction. I think that this is what you were meaning.
Although I would like to slightly contradict you. I'm not going to contradict you. I'm just going to leave it, play with words around, but it's important, you know. We produce evidences, or better said, we produce conditions for evidences. Evidence is a radically aesthetic term. Yeah, when we are used to accept uncritically that natural sciences produce evidence. Well, they are doing it more and more, because more and more they are working with images, right? But an argument is, in a strict sense, not an evidence. You know, we produce conditions of visibility, so we produce evidences. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. But it is important that we playing for our terms, you know?
But maybe exactly this is the point, to take also a term evidence away from sort of a product or something
right.
graspable.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I call like conditions for evidence, you know?
Yes.
So practice like that, join the practices through the practices themselves or through engaging with the artifacts that the practices produce. For example, images. Yeah, images are evidences. Yeah, in a strict sense. But not in order to see it like that, not in order to get convinced that it is like that. This is not what we do, but in order to open up other possibilities of seeing it.
Yeah, so relating to
possibilities of seeing it differently. Yeah, this is I think this is our strength. You know?
I think I agree, and I wanted to point only something out, because the question was also about something that is an interaction between disciplines, and I think that these conditions that generate generate malleably, porosely evidence, that they can also communicate, and I think creating these conditions to let different approaches communicate is something that we need tools for that. And because also the more we know that the artistic and aesthetic cognition is as important as the scientific or any other practice of cognition, the more different sciences and cognitions are going to mold together, no?
Right, absolutely right. We need tools, as you said, and also we need spaces. You know, we need places to come together. It's not so much about. I don't think it works in the basic of transmission of knowledge, because we don't produce knowledge. This is my idea. You know, what we do is to create conditions for evidence. For example, conditions of seeing differently. So this might happen in a context. Yeah. In which other people can engage, you know, and other people can participate in these possibilities. You know? We're talking about things that are fragile, vulnerable, and this fragility needs kind of generous containers to be shared.
Yes, and talking about generous containers, where our researchers think together while practicing and sharing practices. Victor Fernandez asked, what is a researcher to you, or what does it the proof be? What I don't know. What does it prove? The transformation from an artistic to an aesthetic research. I don't understand that. What does a research do, and what proves the transformation from the artistic research into the aesthetic research?
So the first question is not what is a researcher.
Yes. Actually, he speaks about what is a researcher to you.
Okay.
Or what does it prove? I don't know. I don't understand exactly about this transformation.
I think it's between the gap.
But he asks basically what turns artistic research into aesthetic research. What is the difference, I guess? And then he writes, so therefore, a conditioned presentation is a subjective evidence in itself.
Well, I don't pretend to my idea is not to transform artistic into aesthetic. Mm-hmm. So as I try to explain at the beginning of the lecture, I opt for the term aesthetic instead of the term artistic for different reasons, and I mentioned some of them. You know, for me, if I remember right what I said, so I put like three reasons. I explained three reasons. One is to say, well, it's not about doing certain things in a certain way. It is also, it's not about doing art, you know, doing fitting in the normativity of art, but it's about acting, interacting, engaging in the interaction in a specific way. In this way, I call it aesthetic. You know, mm-hmm. in the current context, I'm always scared that if I use the word artistic, people, I mean, the listener is going to have in mind the idea of someone producing art, doing artworks, yeah.
Or through art.
Okay, nothing against that.
No.
Nothing against that. Yeah. All I don't have any problem to consider sorry, I'm turning out this to consider artistic practices as aesthetic practices. It's clear, but in the current context in which art is an established social system, I need to say, well, it's not about that. It's more as a form of engagement. Yeah. And so every kind of activity, like walking,
Could become an aesthetic practice.
could be aesthetic practice if it's performed in a certain way. Yeah. Someone could argue, and it will be right, say, well, but this can be considered as an artistic practices. Yes, but I want to point to a very specific criteria. Yeah, it is the very specific way in which the practitioner engages with with her environment. Yeah. And a researcher, well, a researcher is someone that search again and again. I like to always support it in the search, you know, to like them to research. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's someone that systematize systematize the search. And that's why a researcher is a practitioner, because a practice is a systematization of basically defined as a systematization of actions. Yeah. When we practice, we can repeat actions again and again, always differently, always with variation, but still with the sense of I am doing it again. Yeah. So in these terms, practice and research have a very intimate relationship. So a researcher is a practitioner, the search again and again in a systematized way.
So it's just to trying to understand, because I'm also in the process of making sense of the notion of your proposition of aesthetic.
Thank you.
So the aesthetic is a process that is maybe it has it's like subject and object and transformation all at the same time. It's like multi-procedural. It's like an art is like so that's, if it would be all the time an artistic cognition, it would be like producing something, and the aesthetic cognition is like producing, making sense, repeating. It's like these complex processes, sharing, giving.
Well, I see the aesthetic as a kind of I mean, in an attending to an ideal definition of art, I would say art is aesthetic practice. Yeah. But attending to my perception of the current social realization of art, I cannot say that. You know? I see aesthetic action or aesthetic cognition as the core of any artistic practice. Yeah, but also because I am very focused on aesthetic research. Yeah. I need this differentiation of saying, well, it's not about producing art. It's not about producing artworks. Meaning, it's not about producing artifacts consumable by the art system. Yeah. But I don't exclude the production of artifacts, the production of artistic artifacts, as part of the process of researching through aesthetic practices. I don't exclude that, but it's not a condition. Yeah. So sometimes when I work, for example, people say, "Well, but is this art?" Well, I don't care, you know. So I don't care if what you see, so the outcomes of, so the tangible outcomes of my work fit into the category of art, meaning that it could be situated in a museum, a gallery, or similar places. You know, well, if it happens, fine, but it's not my goal. You know, my goal is to enable the kind of transformations, the kind of destabilizations I try to explain in the lecture. You know, and well, yeah, I mean, what you say is more complex. Yeah, yeah, aesthetic cognition is always, so cognition is always a complex relational, is the realization of a complex dynamic relational system. Yeah, so there are always a lot of agents involved. In this sense, coming back to the question before, the researcher is not the one who do the research, is one of the agents involved in that. You know? And this is valid for natural sciences and for artistic research. So yeah, we are dealing always with complex dynamic systems and processes which involve objects, subjects, circumstances, histories, stories, you know. Yeah, and my idea is that this is a general case, and aesthetic cognition is a specification, is a specific way of doing it,
and
or to engaging in it.
Yeah, so to me, somehow I understand it is that it is actually, as I would speak about the process rather taking over than the product. So meaning, like, very simple terms, in my choreographic terms, like the way rather than the target. So there is no target, there is no, it's just following a question mark, I would say, in some way. And so it's really the power of practice, what I hear out of, like, translating into my choreographic terms, the power of practice. And but the point is that, of course, we as dancers or movers are so connected to the body itself. So to us, making art is also in us. So that means very often the practice becomes also sometimes our artistic outcome, or also not. But I think we, as a lot of artists, work with object, with something. We are the object and subject of our research in the same time. So I'm thinking, of course, you speak always about this specific way of engaging or relating. Can you say once more, what would that specific way be? Because I feel, of course, we spoke before about, is this, Steve, that I understand well, to you also, even engaging in a biological research, but from an aesthetic perspective, would be to also finding a quality of engaging into that search with awareness, with hiring of awareness of senses and emotionality. Is that the proposition?
Yeah, yes and no. I think maybe to make clear the point is this. Maybe this is the way. When you say biological research, yeah, so I would say biological research is biological research and aesthetic research is aesthetic research. There is, of course, one line of thought that's saying, well, all every form of research has aesthetic basis. Well, I understand the argumentation, but I would not go this way. I understand the argumentation in saying all kind of research has a perceptual basis. Yeah, of course, yeah. But I mean, all kind of reasons make use of senses. Yeah, but aesthetic research and aesthetic action is not only the use of the senses, but as a specific use of the senses. Yeah. So, and what is this specificity? Yeah. Okay, but I'm gonna go there. But biological research and aesthetic research are not differentiated by the object of research. Biologists and artists can research, or aesthetic practitioners can research a molecule, the pandemic, it's not about objects. You know, the differentiation between the different kinds of research is not based on the object they research. We all can research everything. The question is that we do it it differently. Yeah, this is nothing new. A philosopher research whatever the pandemic in a different way that biologists would do. Yeah, so do um, so we're doing the same. And then your point is, and this is absolutely the core of my proposition, say what is the difference? Yeah, the difference is a way of how do we engage, how do we act, and that's what I say. Aesthetic cognition must be based on the definition of aesthetic action. What does it mean to act aesthetically? Yeah, and there is where the differences are clear, at least for me, and I try to put them clear. My proposal goes in a double way. First, reinforcing sensory motor activity, so the actions of senses and motors, perception, movement, as a unity. Yeah, this is one of the bases of the enactive approach. And reinforcing an emotional contact to the object. Yeah, so if you think about that, I mean, emotionality, although we all know it's there, it does not play a role, or it should not play a role in natural sciences. We know it's not true, but what is a problem for them or should be excluded is our basis. Yeah, we mobilize our subjectivity, our most fundamental subjective agencies in order to research, you know. And this implies for me to neutralize all kinds of action which are very present, even constitutive for natural sciences, which are so target oriented. Yeah, we don't have a plan. I always say a research project, of course we have to write this when we write an application, unfortunately, but we don't have to have a plan. Artists go to the studio without, or can go to the studio without a plan, and begin to do in a certain way, with a certain temporality. And this temporality is not a tense temporality saying, okay, these are my objectives, I'm going to go for that, chuck, 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 chuck. No, we don't work like that. Yeah, so our research cannot work like that. And if this is not the time structure, yeah, if we have a non-tense time structure, the use of will, you know, must be also reduced. Yeah, I'm positing that the idea is to intensify the sensory motor, and emotional engagement with our object of research in order to allow the spontaneity of the field of shared agencies. It's not me who do the research. I engage with the spaces, with other people, with materials, and so on, in an open-ended way. Yeah, and there is clear that biological research and aesthetic research are different, although they might have, and they have to have, the same object if they have to make or to build a common ecology of practices.
Everything clear. I understood.
Fantastic.
I understood that very well. I mean, probably my question was a bit also because I actually meant more like, because then now I'm clear that for you aesthetic practice is connected definitely to practices that are practiced rather by, I mean, I would say by artists, but
yeah, no problem.
Yeah, completely, because of course we are practicing this scale of awareness and attunement and alertness and everything as you want to call it.
Of course.
Also to the body, you are more aware of the sensory and more aware of the proprioception and all that things. So
yeah, my point, maybe to make it more clear about that, I mean, art is the space in which aesthetic action has been developed.
Yes.
And is developed. Yeah, but because I want to focus on aesthetic research, on research, and not on production, although I don't exclude production if it's a mean for research, you know. Because of that, I make this differentiation between artistic and aesthetics. But of course, this is what artists do every day. Yeah, yeah. But not only artists, this is also my point. Somatic practices, for example, are for me aesthetic or can be aesthetic practices, clearly, clearly.
We've got some question. We're gonna have Blanca Fulana Fernandez is writing, you mentioned the current crisis is not an ecological crisis, but a crisis of the logic. Brilliant. Can you further explain where this idea comes from?
Yeah, well, I didn't say this exactly. I said that I was playing with the concept of ecological crisis. Yeah. So what I like to say is that the ecological crisis is literally an ecological crisis, meaning that is not that is not a crisis of our relationship to nature or the rest of nature. We are nature. This exactly this is the crisis, but it's a crisis of the logic of the house, ecology. Yeah. So I'm playing with the term the same way I do with artistic and aesthetics, and in order to say, let's take seriously the question of the term ecology. Yeah, it's not only about nature, it's about the house, it's about the logic of the house, it's about, and that's why I say the ecological crisis is a systemic crisis, meaning that it's a crisis of all the relationship, of the way we establish relationship, not only with nature, but between us, with our objects, with our spaces, with our materials, and so on and so on. Yeah. So yeah, it's a systemic crisis. That's what I wanted to say. It's not a negation. It's an extension or radicalization.
Yes, it is one and the other. Yeah, it speaks for both. Okay, thank you very much. There's another one.
Yeah. So it's not an
also one. Here maybe the another one also from the same person. Also, what systemic changes of relationships do you feel are more relevant if threatened or subverted? And thank you for a beautiful lecture.
Thank you for listening and the comment. What kind of changes of relationship are?
Systemic changes of relationships do you feel are more relevant?
Yeah.
Threatened or subversed? This is a relevant dot if threatened or subversed.
What is the first term? Subverse?
Subversed, I think subverted. This would be
okay.
Threatened or subverted. Yeah.
Subverse, like subversion.
Okay.
Like subverted. It's
really,
not
are you sure? Threatened or subverted? I think it's subversion.
Well, I mean, we know what it. I mean, threatened. I think it's the from above, right? The power of from above threatens something. Subversion comes from below. So.
Okay.
Understand.
Well, I think the most important thing is to really break this duality.
Yeah.
From top down and bottom up. So and go to a much more non-dual logic. So a really systemic logic. You know, it's not this or that. I mean, thinking a problem in terms of this or that, they or us. I think it's not the way. So I think we have to think relationships in a much more integrated terms of this and this, they and us, and how do we relate to each other. And I think the most important criteria and the most important motivation maybe is that these relations are thought, established and performed in common and for the common. I think this is what we know, what we knew, and what in this current situation we cannot avoid to see any longer. You know, I think the critic to capitalism and so on. I think I wish it goes in the direction not to saying they and us, but saying no, we are all in the same boat. Although some people does not see them, and then well maybe you can say they, the people that don't see that, yeah. But the idea is to understand that all relations are relations in and of the same system, that there is one system. When in the ecological movement, traditional ecological movement, there's only one world. I can say this in systemic terms, to say there is one system of relationships, and we are all involved. You know, either we work all for the common, and we based these relationships in the establishment and the sustainability of the common, or the system is going to fail.
Yes, I think also it's very much about that many we's, as I call it, many we's that identify as we,
Yeah,
don't see that they are part also of a lot of other we's, and that the other we's are part of
exactly.
we all belong to many we's, and even if we search for we have to understand that our we is totally interconnected always, and that
Exactly.
the fights and the struggles are never standing alone or autonomous. What
The
you were
we, the we must be not. We don't have to pervert the we. The we is integrative, not exclusive.
no.
We is us. It's not the others. You know, the others is part of the we. So that's exactly the point. Yeah, and we need bottom up and top down. We need an integration. We need an effective integration of bottom up and top down. Of course, we need to increase bottom up. This is clear, because there is much too much top down. This is clear, but we don't have to exclude bottom up and top down, and we don't have to oppose bottom up to top down. You know, the idea is, how do we? It's like the ecology of research practices. You know, so the first question, how do we? Well, it's a question of how do we integrate? How do we allow a higher level of participation? Yeah. So the direction must be an inclusive direction.
Definitely, and it's a systemic change again, because again, enable relationships that are not inscribed in the systems that are operating at the moment.
Right.
And also relating to the question to the other person about this subverting or threatening, it reminds me very much of that. I mean, of my own research that I just like do over years, but there was something about, you know, this action of carrying, of a body that carries something and has to always push against something in order to have force. And the other one is the opposite of total release and collapse and apathy. And there is something in between, which I completely relate to working with the senses, that it creates a certain sustainability, which doesn't completely burn you out all the time,
Exactly.
It creates a sudden, subtle amount of energy, which is sustainable and pleasant. And I think that this is a characteristic of all the revolutions of this uprising and falling and uprising and falling. This is what happens all the time.
Right.
So I feel on a micro level, on a very simple body shape, of this tension and pushing or complete, you know, just collapsing under. There's something between the black and white. So like this gray zone, which I feel is that zone of sensation, which can construct a skeleton that is functioning in a different way, but is much more sustainable. And I think that this word of sustainability for me comes very much connected to this, what you're speaking about finding attunement and awareness, a relationality in a very soft manner, not over pushing or pulling, not resisting and or going away, something that can remain. And yeah, it was just
exactly. And I mean, this is clear again. So the capitalist system, the capitalist system is a neurodepressive system. It's up and down. Yeah. It is clearly not sustainable. Either it works and it generates a lot of richness, or it collapses. Yeah. And this is related to the idea of true extraction. Yeah, it's an extractionist system, but it's also a system which is I cannot get the second X, but that is a teleological system. Yeah, it's a system based in the structure of means to the goal. There is a goal, maximize profit. Yeah, we need a goal. Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, there is always intention. Yeah, but the question is, Second,
the relation.
what kind of intention, and second, what kind of quality of intention. And there's a possibility that this intention is open. Yeah. And if the intention is open, the system becomes an immanent system. And this is what you're describing. And then you are attentive, aware of what is going on. Yeah. And this is how a system can be sustained. Yeah. Because I am aware of how I am feeling. Yeah. I'm not just sacrificing for a goal or just, yeah. So falling in these two extremes that you were, to these two unproductive or very productive and totally unproductive, but for sure not sustainable streams. But if the system goes inside and it's a much more a system of immanence, yeah, which is a system which is attentive to itself and its maintenance, which is how living systems work. Yeah, these living systems are not teleological systems. Yeah, they are not doing what they're doing in order to. No, they're doing because it is the way it works. Yeah, and this is enough.
Yes,
it's more than enough. So so the idea of I mean, and I could go for very different.
But it's very interesting how actually our own body even shows that this
absolutely
is the truth. Somehow this is all that is there, and that this what's outside of us, it works upon such different strategies or different factors. And
absolutely. And that's why the system, the social system we are living in, is so perverted, you know, and that's why bodies suffer so much in our system.
And also how the bodies are disciplined and navigate them. It's like the pressure on the bodies.
Bodies have to be negated as bodies in order to turn instruments of production, etc., etc. And production, I mean, in the word production, you have already this X, you know. Pro is to the outside, you know, to lead to the outside. And I'm saying, well, it's not about production, but about trans, which is through formation. You know, this is the idea. The body is an ever transforming entity, you know, close in itself and in intimate touch or connection with the environment.
Yes, and through this, of course, higher awareness and smaller steps, we could be negotiating the intention much better all the time. Renegotiate it, but of course, at the moment, it's totally impossible.
Right.
We have a couple of we have
a couple of very big questions at 20.
It's good. It's
the systems as a project.
Exactly. So how could we develop these systems as a projection? So how to, I guess, a projection, how to share them, or how to be more, I don't understand
the projection. I understand the first part. So how could we develop the systems?
Maybe that's a project, no? Or no?
Because I don't know if it's now about the movie projection or if it's about projection as an imaginary projection. Maybe it's about an idea of
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm a little bit. I always say that I go much more a perceptive way than an imaginatory way. But I don't want to fall in exactly what I said, that these or that, right? But production, you know, projection to throw to the outside, you know. There's a fantastic sentence of a architecture theorist in Spain say to project, and he's playing with the idea that in Spanish to design in architecture is proyectar. So to make a project, is what the architects do. And he uses this to say to project is to neutralize or to take off the value of the present moment. Yeah. So if you're projecting, you are always somewhere else. What I'm saying is that let's be here.
Yeah.
Let's do it here. You know, how can we do it? I mean, we are talking now. We are asking questions. We are You know, we are establishing relationships. These relationships are the relationships we are talking about. Yeah. So I think this, I said it in a moment in the, I mean, related to this idea of neutralizing target-oriented and will-based forms of action. To say, how should we do it? We have to do it. We are doing it now. You did it with this symposium. We are here. We are talking. We are talking in a way. We are not trying to impose any theories. We're trying to think together. How could it be? You know, we are allowing resonances to happen. We are doing it. You know, this idea of I think it would be really interesting to neutralize this transcendent structure of Western thinking, you know, always going beyond. Why do we have to go beyond? You know, can we stay at home talking about ecology? You know, I mean, this phenomena of the panic of being at home. Say, well, people, yeah, I mean, people have terrible homes, you know. So how is this possible? You know, it should be a pleasure to be at home. Okay, no one wants to be limited. Yeah, fine, you know what I mean. But it's saying, can we project the images of the future? This can be a very interesting exercise to do. Yeah, but I think we have to do much more, or at least as much, the exercise of doing how it is here. How do I feel here? How do I do it now? How are we having this conversation? This conversation is the only conversation we have now, you know, and we can be dead and we know it tomorrow. So, yeah, to project is interesting. Why to renounce to that? Yeah, but I'm much more interested in saying, how do we do it now? How do we do it here? You know, I mean, to really, I mean, I'm convinced about that, and I'm of course not the first person that say that, but this capitalistic extractive projecting system is only possible on the basis of a transcendent way of thinking. Yeah, it's always beyond.
Yes.
Yeah? It's always beyond. No, I mean, it's here.
Yes, of course.
It's here, you know.
It also works only because it manages to take us away from ourselves, because
exactly
we are not
exactly.
with us. We are not with us. We are not attending anymore to our feelings, to our sensations. We
Yeah.
are somewhere else. And I mean, this attitude that you're just expressing is sort of attitude of here and now in performing, being here in the moment.
Yeah.
As we also talked about improvisation before, I think this is also one of the methods that I can definitely think this is a method where you really completely need to be here and now and respond to the slightest other movement, affect, and anything that's in the place, even if you are not knowing where you're heading. And for me, this is something that somehow seems a bit obvious to me, or obvious, or maybe known. But I definitely think maybe this is exactly the question that we have to talk tomorrow about in the panel. How are we supposed to bring this here and now into the social reality and the how can we practice being here and now with us and still being able to connect and engage in relations?
Yeah.
With that attitude, not again losing ourselves and again projecting ourselves into a dominant hierarchies of the outside or of the others, or not, I don't want to use the others, but the other agencies, which I think is so easy to lose. This is what we practice in the studio or in an artistic artistic environment. Then we are being put outside and suddenly we start to tick and fit into totally different dynamics, which we...
Yes, because the abstract also with language and images, and sometimes the concepts get stronger than the reality we are that is there negotiating. And I think when you are like practicing with beyond language, I use beyond or outside of language, this connection starts much more, it's more imminent.
Yeah.
Or it's like the process when you are like the sensuous process of writing, even if it's I'm not, when I'm in my own writing my paper or this experience, oh, it's sensorial, it's me thinking, it's my brain, the fingers, the memory, blah, blah, in the moment. But I'm not trying to explain you something. I'm not trying to think that sometimes talking is obliging us to go project even more. And I wonder if with time, if we learn to do philosophy or to talk about things in a way that helps us to stay maybe in
Yeah.
the moment.
And also like I mean, there are different practices of talking and practices of writing, and there are aesthetic practices of writing, and aesthetic practices of writing are also aware of what the words say, know what I want to say with words.
Yeah. Or how the words feel like.
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah,
like,
sometimes the rhythm of
yeah,
language is extremely powerful.
yeah,
These types of thoughts, this is something that
yeah,
fascinates.
exactly. It's not about I'm going to write in order to say that, you know, but I'm going to write in order to write and see what happens, you know. And then there is this fantastic, marvelous generative reality, you know, which is kind of coming out of itself. It's a wonder, you know. And this can happen with a movement, and this can happen with a text, you know. So suddenly you write a word, and then you look at the word, and then you know, and then yeah, this is one of my practice. But yeah, or this the first panel today about voice, you know. So what does the voice say? Not I say, but what does the voice say? You know. So what is the sound there? Suddenly, you know, asking to be listened, and instead of that, we are already in the next, 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 in the next. Can we stop? And this was a beautiful, for me, beautiful, of course, in a tremendous context, but this beautiful moment of the confinement. You know, with a lot of people, I was talking with a lot of people, and a lot of people was kind of feeling the same, and we were like not really able to see that, because it was politically correct to say that this moment was a beautiful moment, you know, when everything stopped. It's terrible, yeah, we have to diversify that, but the moment of stopping, you know, and seeing why it was so beautiful, because suddenly we could see everything is there. We were cut out of our plans. Yeah, we were brought back to the present.
Yes, and yes.
I mean, it's a pity I'm not in Graz now. So you know, I would love to be there with all the people who are there and talking,
Well, it
and
would be
going
Alex.
for beer afterwards.
Alex, if you were in Graz, you wouldn't meet us because we are in Vienna.
Exactly. Actually, we live in Vienna, so it will be like
No way.
Alone.
but I have already, like, we have both, like Magda, I'm sure too, like after every conversation today, it's like I would like to be talking like 4 hours more. Like I was thinking,
Of
I
course.
want to talk about the inside, like looking inside the mob. It's not but I guess that's beautiful to stop a conversation when it's already have a time, and
Yeah.
when there is that potential for more.
Yeah.
That is that
Yeah.
our brains has been like our brains, our hearts and our bodies and our brains are juiced.
Very much so. And I think that today was a day of amazing discussion and like thoughts provoking. And we always had the feeling like it's such a big pity we cannot just go for a dinner or for a beer and just
Right.
have
Right.
this social aspect is really, this is painful, but still I'm thinking that it's so beautiful, and I'm
Yeah.
so grateful for everything. We're gonna say good night here tomorrow. We are going to first meet at 11 on a
Yeah.
panel on subversive strategies of gathering and musicking and dancing together.
And sounding.
Also in the confinement, but also in different cultures and in different systems. How sometimes it wasn't easy at all anyway before. And we're gonna talk about vibration, about all that aspects of being together in the physical space. And at 3 o'clock, again, Alex is going to moderate a panel that we got at the moment. I think we are 10 people who are subscribed. So if there is still some people wanting to join, please have a look at our Facebook or at our website. You will find the email address. You can subscribe for the panel that is going to deal exactly with research through artistic or through even aesthetic practices and the social transformation and responsibility. So please feel free and hit us up. We wish you good night. We wish, or good day, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, very much. Have a good night.
And also thank you to all the people listening to us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all very much.
Yes, so cheers. Have a virtual cheers to you and
cheers.
see you tomorrow. Bye.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.